It's Mark and Pete.
Hello, and welcome to the show. More colourful conversations with Mark and Pete. This week's colourful conversation is all around the key subject of short-termism. And the posed question is short-termism killing business? Now, short-termism refers to an excessive focus on short-term results at the expense of long-term interests. Interestingly, a report from the Business Roundtable Institute for Corporate Ethics and the CFA Institute really highlights the problem with short-term cycle, and it notes the excessive short-term focus by some corporate leaders, including investors and analysts combined, and essentially with insufficient regard for long-term strategy. So with all this, what are the destructive results as a result of short-termism, both in terms of the market's credibility and its ability to really inspire the market and investors? So a lot of analysts really look at the global downturn and point to short-termism. So with me today is Pete. So Pete, what do you think is driving the culture and behavior of short-termism in business?
Well, I think that there is a problem at the heart of human nature, that people want always to get more. They want to be successful and seen to be successful. But this is exacerbated by the fact that it's easier to react quickly in business. Certainly if you're trading in stocks and shares, but also in other forms of trading, it's easier to communicate quickly, and therefore it's easy to react in a sudden way to a change where you should have had a more measured approach or a long-term approach. In other words, it's easier to react to get a short-term benefit and a short-term gain, to react quickly, when what you should be doing is fitting in your short-term decisions in line with your long-term aims and objectives. It's interesting to note that back in 1815, at the Battle of Waterloo, people were using carrier pigeons to trade on the outcome of the battle. And carrier pigeons take at least several hours to make a journey, and it may well take half a day. But the average speed of an order execution on the New York Stock Exchange has fallen from 20 seconds only a decade ago to under 1 second today. So you've gone from a carrier pigeon to computer mouse in the space of time from 1815 to today. So we're looking at a speedy response being possible, and then people giving in to the temptation of just reacting quickly in order to get a short-term quick gain.
Yes, and it's quite remarkable that statistic that you just highlighted is really showing the pace in which our economy is being driven. Sure. And just sort of philosophically, to try and sort of echo some thoughts from my side, clearly, as you've highlighted, a lot of industry leaders, and in fact the whole system, is actually sort of geared around this principle of short-termism. So just to sort of set a scene, here's a little poem called Blind Stupidity. For businessmen with corporate blinkers, short-sightedness is a trademark, lacking acumen and strategic thinkers, no matter how loud they bark. Blindly working like troubled tinkers, without commercial spark, marking almighty business stinkers, leaving everyone in the dark. So it's true to say that whilst perhaps in the past that the pace of life was very different, perhaps even company incentives were very different. People, I remember when I first started in business during the 1980s, very much put a lot of emphasis on all businessmen putting in a 1 year, a 2 year, a 3 year, even a 10-year plan. Whereas today, the concept of even considering what might happen in 10 years' time is actually causing people a lot of grief, because most people, particularly public quoted companies, are actually incentivized on their quarterly results. So that may in itself be driving behavior.
Yes, it's interesting that it's not necessarily individual companies or individual heads of companies or people in charge of the strategy of the company that are the issue. It's the way that we've developed a way of measuring success and of rewarding people for making short-term decisions and seeing success as someone who is providing a return right now, not looking at the quality of the business being built up. I think that's an important issue. When we're talking about short-termism is a problem, what we've got to really identify what is the problem. And the problem is in not looking after the long-term goals of the company, you're not actually building a company of the right standard. Now, having to be quite vague because we're talking about all different companies. But if you were talking about, say, a specific, a scientific research company that was developing new products over time, say it's in the pharmaceutical industry, if it's focusing on short-term gain, it's going to be looking for the most effective drugs to put onto the market right now. Whereas if it was looking for long-term gain, what it would be trying to do would be to develop research that can respond to different needs in the long-term future. New diseases, new health problems that are going to come up. So you're not in the problem. To identify the problem with short-termism, it really is that if you're focusing on responding to responding to situations in the short term, or your aim is to produce something that's effective in the short term, your company will lose its ability to respond to events in the future, and will probably go under at some point. And that's a problem for the company itself, but it's also a problem for the consumer in that they're not going to get the products that they need. Looking at the pharmaceutical industry, as I gave as an example, if the right drugs aren't available from the companies, certainly from large companies, they're not going to be, even if they are produced, say, by academic departments in hospitals and universities, they're not going to be available at a wide enough distribution in order to be effective in combating disease. So there, what you've got is a problem caused for all of society by this company focusing on short-termism. So the problem with focusing on short-term results is that you end up doing harm to the actual way that the company operates, which have different harmful effects depending on the business, but it will always have harmful effects, whatever the business, if you're not looking at the long-term strategy of the health of the company.
Yes, and also the concept of short-termism, particularly in the context of today, is the consequence. So this principle of, is short-termism killing business? Well, a good example of that, of course, is skills. So whether you look at the energy industry where there's fluctuations in the oil price, whether you look at the retail market where perhaps a particular retailer might be struggling to compete in the market in a given quarter, people are made redundant, and so you lose those skills. And often what that can mean is that the business not only loses the talent to support their business, but they lose the expertise, they lose the experience. But often a lot of people have to find other industries just simply to gain employment. Now, I just want to cite something which really illustrates this. Interestingly, that the Labour Party actually commissioned a report back in March 2013, and it was essentially of what was seen as an entrenched feature of British business, which was damaging economic growth. And in the document, the former Institute of Directors and a boss, Sir George Cox, who interestingly talked about this in the report, and he recommended making changes to executive pay. So essentially the rewards were more long-term. Now, the CBI says pay should be a matter for firms rather than just simply government, which is fair enough. However, in his report, which Sir George, who incidentally was the former chief executive of the IT company Unisys, said the pressure to deliver quick results to the potential detriment of the long-term development of a company have become an entrenched feature of the UK business environment. And he also continued to say that almost 3/5 of the senior business leaders he had consulted believed short-term thinking was a major or significant impediment to the economic growth. So these are voices or sound bites from people who have already led leading companies who recognize the problem and are really calling out for a change in the way that businesses actually conduct themselves.
Yes, I think that as soon as you start talking about that, the way that you conduct yourself, you start to recognise that you need to take the role of business leaders seriously and give them credit where they're behaving is ethical and is trying to aim for the good of society as a whole. Whereas if you're only giving them credit by giving them more money, if they make more money for their shareholders and maybe also for their employees as well, and maybe in terms of their own salaries, so their family benefits. But if that's the only reward they get, then it's human nature. That is what they're going to tailor their way of working to fit it in with the fact that they're rewarded for short-termism, and also not just for short-termism, but they are rewarded for effectively being greedy. So it's if you treat people like animals, they'll behave like animals. If you treat people as if they're greedy, they will be greedy. If you treat people as if they are grown-up people, responsible members of society, and you expect them to contribute to society by their building up of their business, then, okay, some people will never be dragged away from greedy short-term attitudes, but many people will respond. People respond to a positive view of them, to a positive encouragement of working with the whole of society in view. I mean, it's just thinking about it from a term that's used a lot in education, and it's used a lot in schools these days, which is value added. So, what is the value added to a pupil who comes from a background where they weren't helped in their studies? When they go to this particular school, will they improve? And the value added to that pupil is how the school is measured. Now, in company terms, of course, this is also used. What is the value added to a product after you've dealt with it? Maybe it's a natural resource. What is the value added when you've dealt with it and then you sell it on? And I think you can also say, well, what is the value added to the country or to society as a whole by this company being in existence? Not just what is the value added to the actual product. What is the value added to the society in which the company is based? And if companies are seen as needing to do that, that's their role. They're part of what we really value in society. Then you'll have a change in the way people view it. But I believe we have a problem, certainly in British society, of looking down on people in business. And if you go back a few years, people were seeing as being in trade. Oh, they're in trade. So they're not to be regarded as being such a valued member of society as someone who is one of the professions, like a doctor, for example. Now, if we continue to have that view and treat businessmen as though that's all they are, they're simply money-making machines, then in general they're going to behave like them. If we see them as themselves being valued members of society because they add value, then we'll have a change in the culture where companies are expected to add value to society. And I must say that there are shining examples of companies in the past which did this. I come from Birmingham. If you think of the little town within Birmingham of Bourneville, set up by the Cadbury company, this was a way that society in that area was transformed because of the way that company behaved. It looked after its employees. It looked after the environment. It created a great park, which is still used in that area by the public today. The way that that company behaved then benefited society as a whole, and the leaders of that company were seen as people who contributed to society as a whole. They were seen as valued leaders in society. We need a change. We need a change in the way that we view businessmen.
Yes, and I think philanthropy comes in there because obviously Cadbury had a particular philosophy as well. Investment in people, investment in families, as well as, of course, the business and the infrastructure by taking that longer term view. But I guess the question is, are we being a bit unrealistic to expect CEOs to think long term and effectively ignore the short term pressure, bearing in mind that they are effectively employed to reach goals and to effectively, support their investors. But there is also a counter side to this because, ironically, whether it's a private company, a limited company, or even if it is a public company, a lot of our long-term investments, things like pension funds, for example, rely on big companies and their results. So if a company, for example, is always subject to those short-term roller coaster rides, ironically, a lot of people's pensions, which are primarily a long-term investment, get affected. So there's always this strange dichotomy we've got here. On the one hand, we've got a world which encourages people to sort of think longer term with your pensions, whether that's company or private. But at the same time, there's the tremendous pressure to be able to deliver results month by month.
Yes, I think that the apparent contradiction between wanting to have companies that will react quickly, particularly when you're talking about money that's been invested, and wanting long-term planning, is that what you're looking for is companies that can react quickly, but when they do react within the confines of a planned strategy for growth, and that even their overall long-term aim and strategy is subject to change if there are issues that come up which means that they need to change their strategy. They can react quickly, they can change their strategy, but they do have a long-term strategy, and they have a long-term aim in view, which could change depending on if circumstances change. Then they can change their long-term aim, but they do have one that they're aiming towards. The Bible is committed to having people look at the long term. I mean, just at a base level, in the Bible, it talks about people aiming for eternity, and it says in Ecclesiastes that God has hidden eternity in their hearts, that eternity is in there. The long-term view is the best thing for humans. But I mean, I'm sort of reading into a verse there saying that means that it's long-term, but it's actually there written out in black and white that we should plan for the long term. I would just quote a little bit from the Bible to talk about how this worked out in practice for one of the great leaders in the Bible when Nehemiah was rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem. And he'd done so as the result of a lot of prayer. They got into the position where, along with God's long-term plans, Jerusalem, the city same city which still stands today, and the city which was at the heart of the worship of the Jews in the Old Testament and still today, the walls had been knocked down, and the plan was to rebuild them. And Nehemiah was building them up. He had a group of people there, and there was opposition. It was a very competitive market, and not just competitive in terms of people also trying to build up the walls of their cities, but people being very aggressive, trying to attack the people physically, and also to undermine them by negative PR campaign. And Nehemiah says that reporting what they are saying about him, he says they're thinking their hands will get too weak for the work and it will not be completed. But I prayed, now strengthen my hands. Nehemiah 6 verse 9, reading from the New International Version. But he prayed, his prayer was that he would be strengthened to continue keeping on going towards the long-term goal. But he was reacting to the situation. And during that same part of his book, it talks about Nehemiah telling the people to carry a sword with them, actually drawn sword, and work with one hand. So they reacted to the situation, but still kept the long-term goal in view. And we see the results of that today, that Jerusalem is still there. And this idea that you should react to situation, you should change what you're doing in order to respond to events, while still keeping the long-term goal in view, is the way, not just to run a business, but the way to run the whole of society. To have a long-term, a good aim in view, a way that you want all things to be run, how you see society as a whole being good for the people who inhabit it. Then if you have that long-term view, and then each of the companies, each of the endeavours that you undertake fit into that, but responding to situations, then you're going to have a healthy economy. Then you're going to have people such as shareholders making money from companies, but they're going to be able to not only make it sustainably, but they're going to be making money, and people will approve of them making money because they can see the benefit that the company is happening. So it's win, 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 as long as you keep in mind what value are we adding to society as a whole. And when we're responding quickly and responding with short-term measures, those short-term measures are in line with and are assisting the strategy which is aimed at fulfilling our long-term goals.
Yes. And interestingly, with the world that we see today unfolding, this concept of globalization, effectively markets opening up, we see established markets, and other people can classify emerging markets coming on board, whether that's in the Middle East, whether that's in Brazil, whether that's in Russia, and so on. So these are markets that people perceive have opportunities. And of course, there is a great pressure on companies to grow, and of course, ultimately, that does rely on taking a longer-term view in terms of investing in infrastructure, investing in people. But I want to sort of also draw another point of reference, which actually is in the United States of America. So Harvard Business produce a number of reports, eminent reports on a yearly basis. The editor of the Harvard Business Review, his name is Adi Ignatius. Now, he produced a report recently which highlighted quite an alarming statistic. He said the situation regarding short-termism may actually be getting worse. And he cited this particular fact. He said, in 1993, some 20% of executive compensation was based on stock, according to Lynn Stout of Cornwall Law School, as it was also written in the New York Times in July 2014. But it also then went on to quote that today, equity accounts for about 60% of the remuneration from executives at companies. And that's in the Standard & Poor's 500 stock index. So with so much money tied up in stock options, it's not surprising that executives would do almost anything to give their share price a boost, regardless of what costs this may incur after the options are vested. So there again, in something that we see across the globe, across the global markets, we're seeing a trend towards more short-termism. So it's not getting any better, basically.
Yes, it's this problem of short-termism it affects all areas of society, spreading out from the businesses to all different areas. Because what we see is our wealth creators, these companies, going through a shocking boom and bust cycle with increasing frequency, and this just isn't good for society. It means that long-term planning for whole countries is made extremely difficult, and we see that those who manage to retain ownership of property and retain ownership of land win out in the end. So long term, what you end up doing by having this short-termism in terms of companies as a whole, you end up with the wealthy, the small percentage of really wealthy people who own land, who own property in large amounts, getting wealthier, and everyone else getting poorer. And that means that in the end, power gets handed over, because with the money comes power. They get a lot of power being concentrated in the hands of these small people. And by money, I was talking, just generally of wealth. These wealthy people get more wealthy. The number of them is very small and is perhaps getting smaller. I've not seen any statistics on that, but certainly there's a lot of evidence coming out that a really small number of people are getting richer and the rest of the world is getting poorer. There's the popular term, the 1%, meaning 1% of the world
Yes.
has by far the majority of the wealth. But that's not really the issue, in that if you look at what that actually means, we're in the 1%. Most people who own a house or that sort of thing put themselves in the 1% bracket. We're talking about a smaller percentage than that who own phenomenal amounts of wealth. And that will not be shaken as long as we have people not taking on this long-term view. As soon as you're taking a short-term view, you're getting boom and bust, you're getting instability. The people who remain stable keep the actual wealth. If you're trading, normally you're involving money at some point, and if you're you're not often bartering. So if you are trading using money, you end up getting the amount of money that you actually own, maybe whatever amount it is, actually being worth less, because the governments of countries need to cope somehow with the fact that they don't have enough wealth. One way of doing that in the short term is quantitative easing, so that they make each unit of a currency worth less. And so when they do that, they make it more difficult for companies, who again have to respond in trying to react quickly to make it to provide the financing for their current operations. Those who own real wealth, they own resources, they own property, they own land, they remain wealthy, and they become proportionately and in comparison wealthier to the rest of society. So we're making a more unfair society by this disease of short-termism.
Yes. And I think this point about the Great Divide is quite apt, because clearly short-termism is working for some, as you've highlighted, that certainly for those business leaders who have the benefit of being in control of companies, but also the benefit of seeing those huge lucrative rewards come their way. But of course, obviously, for those people who have less influence, but often who are, if you like, victims of short-termism. It's not just killing business, as we've already highlighted, but it's also killing the way that we lead our lives. I think most people typically tend to find that it's harder to be able to plan their lives for the long term. But of course, we would like to hear other people's views. So listeners, we encourage you to let us know. What's your view on short-termism? Do you believe that short-termism is killing business? Has it affected you? So join us again next time for more colourful conversations with Mark and Pete.